Jeri, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah, thank you. You have an exciting path, right? You started off as electrical engineer, and you started tasting different industries before you end up in gaming. What was that process like?
Oh my gosh, my background is even more crazy than that. I've been a lifelong inventor and kind of hacker in the good terms, right? Since I was a young kid, I got started on early home computers. I had a lot of mentors when I was just a kid or a teenager that taught me electronics and radios. My father owned a mechanic business where as soon as I was old enough to turn a wrench, he got me going to his gas station and changing oil in cars and lapping valves and cylinder heads and just doing it all. A very fun childhood, being able to do a lot of making and building and inventing. I think the most interesting piece of my past is my first career. I was a race car driver and a chassis builder. So I actually built these big V8 powered cars, raced them. And then eventually I got such a good reputation of building good cars that I started selling the cars. And it ultimately dropped out of high school because I was making so much money building and racing cars that it didn't make sense for me to hang out in high school when I could go after this other opportunity.
Already figured out the thing. That's
yeah.
great.
And then after that was a really interesting time in my life. It was exciting, but people around racetracks, they're not the classiest of people. I was like dealing with a lot of knuckleheads and stuff like that. It was pretty frustrating for me being kind of in that industry. One day I was hanging out with one of my former high school friends. We were probably in our mid-20s at this point, and he had made a little man cave in his garage, and he had a 486 computer in there, and I was admiring his state-of-the-art computer running Windows 3.11. And
that's the floppy disk days, right?
He had a hard drive.
Oh, you had a hard, okay.
Yeah, he had a hard drive. It was pretty amazing. And we got talking. He's like, yeah, guess what? I convinced this wholesaler that I was a real business, and they sold me all these parts for wholesale. And like this computer would cost me like $1,500, but I actually bought it for like $600 or $700. And my entrepreneurial side at that point is like, ding, oh my gosh, that's some great margin. Working on something I love working on. I was like, that one kind of hangout session, I was like, oh, let's start a business.
That's cool.
Yeah, I ended up selling off all my race car stuff, which frustrated my father, who was constantly convinced that I was going down the wrong path. And then, various points in my life, like the race cars, he's like, I was such a bad teenager. And then all of a sudden I just started doing race cars. And then, oh, she's on a good course now. And then I like throw it all away and I start this other risky business. And he's like, oh, what are you doing? But I sold everything. I put all my money into starting a computer store. And this is kind of a really interesting point in my life where I was kind of like this gothy kid in high school with a chip on my shoulder, kind of got there because everyone didn't understand me, and I was just angry at the world. And that kind of carried into my racing. I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder. Then we start this business, and I now have to work with my friend, and we were just immediately at each other's throats, like just fighting all the time. And now that I look back, at the time I was like, it's all his fault why we're fighting all the time. But in fact, it was probably a lot my fault because I was super edgy back then, doing the goth thing and dressing in black and overdoing my makeup and stuff like that. But he ended up booting me out of the business, which was heartbreaking. Like I loved the business so much. It had taken off. We were doing quite well financially. And then I get booted out, and I was so young, I didn't know how to fight back. And I found myself kind of like crying in my apartment and calling people up like my dad, like, oh, what do I do? And of course, his advice was you should just go back to school, get a degree, get your life in line. I told you
What
this
you're
was gonna,
supposed to do. Yeah.
yeah, I told you this was gonna happen. All the things that parents say to try to protect you. Nothing like terribly mean, but probably the bitter pill I should have been hearing at the time. But then I got mad. I'm like, F this guy, I'm gonna put him out of business. And so I lost all my money. Basically, I'd put every penny I had into this business to bootstrap it, and I didn't have hardly anything to my name at that point. So I scraped together as much money as I could. Actually, broke the lease on my apartment. I found a little it was a barber shop just down the road, like a mile away from his shop. And I rented it. It was super cheap. It was junky. I took the barber chair out and I just threw it out in the back alley, and it disappeared one day.
Wow.
Someone picked it up. And I scraped together enough like money to get some fixtures so I could put some product on the wall, but I didn't have any money for product. So what do? Like I went to his dumpster and I took all the colorful boxes from all the computer components that he had, and I stuck it all over the wall to make it look like the store was legit.
That's awesome. You just
Yeah,
getting it done.
getting it done. That's, in business, you have to like see where you can flex things. Also, like during that time, I was living in the back of the store, starving to death all the time. I learned probably most of my valuable lessons during that period in my life. So I didn't have money for like garbage service. So I was like running around throwing the trash in the from our business and everybody else's garbage. And, one day, the police showed up. I'm working with a customer and they're like, is this your business? I'm like, yeah. And they're like threatening me that they're going to give me a ticket or throw me in jail or something. Very embarrassing to have that happen in front of your clientele. So I kind of learned some lessons of like, you can bend the rules a little bit, but you got to be ethical too, right?
Sure.
The other thing about it is like I was just out for revenge, so I would never be undersold. So I like if someone came in and said like my ex-business partner had something for like $10, I said like, well, I'll do you one better. I'll do it for $9. So I was like constantly wheeling and dealing. But during this like phase, it was like rob Peter to pay Paul constantly, because people would come in like, I want this floppy drive for $9, but I didn't have any. All I had was a box on the wall that was empty. So I don't know how ethical it is. I probably wouldn't do this today, but I would say like, well, that one's committed. But if you give me the money now, I'll go get you, one in like 3 days. And I'd scramble to order all the parts and started to bootstrap the business that way to where I got some money and could hold some inventory. But I think the biggest lesson was across the street from me. Throughout my whole life, mentors have been so instrumental in helping me get to where I am today. But, a business mentor entered my life. He was an insurance salesman across the street. He was successful. He looked the part. He was nice. He'd come over. He was into computers. So he'd come over at lunch and he'd give me, cup of noodle or bring me a hamburger or something because he knew I was starving to death. And he started giving me some of the kind of difficult truths that I needed to hear in a gentle way. Things like relatability. Like I was still dressing kind of gothy. I had this like, edge to me. He'd say things like, I noticed that you were swearing in front of your customers. That's probably not a good way to be relatable. Another thing is, you should probably look the part of like a responsible business owner. So, I know you like to dress this way, but maybe during business hours, you should, kind of look the part. And
helpful hints.
yeah, it was hard for me to hear those things. It sounds weird to me today that it was difficult for me to actually hear those kinds of things. But, I was kind of living this life. Like I had my circle of friends that were all edgy, and then I'm trying to like become more of a professional business person. And it was interesting, this transition in my life. I started doing things to be more relatable with customers, and the business started to grow. And then I started realizing that like all of these like angsty things that I was doing was not because I loved it. It was like a defense mechanism that I was using like in my high school years to protect myself against the jocks or the mean kids.
So
And
you
that
were
I,
gaining some self-awareness at the same time you're gaining business skills.
yeah,
That's
I'm
great.
sorry if this is long-winded.
No, absolutely not. Keep going.
But anyway, the business took off. I ended up having 5 stores. I had, employees. I learned how to hire and fire and how to find the right people, how to market, how to like make your store presentable. It was like a great time in my life. It was also a really hot time for retail computer stores. It was 1995 through 2000 when everyone was getting on AOL and getting online. And it was like this gold rush. Um, and it was very much a family feeling with all the personnel, which every business that I've done ever since, I've always tried to replicate that. It was just magical. We were all passionate about what we were doing. For instance, there was this one gentleman that worked for me. He was about my age, long hair to the middle of his back, kind of typical nerd guy, maybe, not put together as well as everybody else, presenting himself to it like a customer. So I kind of kept him in the back, and he worked on computers. He was super happy doing that for a long time. And sometimes I'd come in on a Sunday and he'd be in there working, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, what are you doing here? Like, I can't pay you overtime to be, working on customers' computers. He's like, no, I just love it. I just want to be here.
Wow.
But, what was really heartwarming one day is he like showed up, he'd trimmed all his hair off and cleaned up his beard, and he had a button up shirt. And he's like, I don't want to be stuck in the back. I want to be out in front with the customers. And that
Nice.
was a really amazing, like, moment for me to see that transformation.
Oh, sure.
It
You
was,
get to watch your team grow. That's really cool.
so it's like somehow through this mentor, like it trickled through me and maybe influenced him a little bit. And then it's really neat. Yeah, we were in like hog heaven back then, lots of money. And then all of a sudden, year 2000 came. There was a big spike because everyone was worried their computer was going to implode on day one of the new millennia. And turns out nothing exploded. And then all of a sudden, the computer market like retracted big time.
Hmm.
And at the same time, big players like Gateway Computers, E-Machines, Dell all came out with like, instead of $1,500 computers, they had like $300 computers and $400 computers. And it just sucked all the wind out of my business. And that was another interesting transition for the team. So I probably employed 15 people or so and had some managers in the various stores. And we all got together as a team, and I was very transparent. Like, we're hemorrhaging money like crazy. We've got 6 months to live, right? We got to do something. So everyone pitched in, we tried everything. We did network installs, we did cell phones, we did satellite dishes, trying to find a new way to kind of keep the party going with the family. And it was partly heartbreaking and also heartwarming as things transitioned. Things got worse. Pretty soon it's starting to look dire. I'm not going to be able to make payroll. So we had to have the hard group decisions, like who's going to be voted off the island, who has other opportunities, who wants to stick it out and try to turn this sinking ship around. And, lots of tears, through the months as the company like dwindled. We tried a lot of things, and eventually it got to a point where like, I just can't do this anymore. And so I offered up the businesses to all the managers of the stores. Like, if you want to keep going, I'll give you the inventory, with the understanding that if someday you turn things around, you'll just pay me for the inventory, but you can give it a go. And it turns out we shut down 2 of the stores immediately because there just wasn't enough traction to keep them going. Three folks took them on and tried to make a go of it. And some of them survived for a while. One of them survives today, which is amazing. In Canby, Oregon, there's still, somehow they did it.
Good on them.
Yeah. Never got my inventory back from, but that's okay. Like, it's forgiven. If you see this, keep it. Like, kudos to you for going through that bloodbath and coming out on the top. But that was was super interesting. It taught me how to work really, really hard, that whole like 5-6 year period of my life. So again, I'm in kind of crying in my beer, calling my friends, like, what do I do? My business has failed. And of course, call my father. And he says, all right, this, you gave it a good run. Yeah, go back to school, get your degree. And of course, what do I do? I mean, this whole time, because I had money, I started like buying electronics equipment and started learning like pretty hardcore electronics just as a hobby. I'm like, nah, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go to Silicon Valley and brute force my way into startups and start doing products and do electrical engineering. It's something I'd always dreamed about doing. And so I took my little bit of savings and hunkered down. Actually took a part-time job at a electronics parts store, like retail store, like a giant Radio Shack. And for like minimum wage, it was so ridiculous just to kind of keep topping off my bank account. And I made this arrangement with the manager of the store that, I'll work 3 days a week, but I need this extra time to like travel to Silicon Valley. I was living in Portland at the time, Portland area. And he was like, yeah, sure, that's great. And so I started going to Silicon Valley and going to all these different trade shows and shaking everybody's hands. And I had this little duffel bag I'd carry with me that had all these little circuit boards that I built that did different things. Like one of them was like a sound generator, and one of them drove an LCD screen, and one of them was like a reconfigurable processor in an FPGA. And I was just meeting lots of entrepreneurs and folks from different companies and getting lots of interviews in startups. And so I'm flying airfare back and forth to Silicon Valley, taking these interviews, and it's draining my bank account fast, and I'm getting lots of no's. Most of the time it would be like, I would get into like 1 or 2 of the interviews, and they'd always ask me things like, oh, it's really interesting that you've done traction control systems for race cars or built all these little circuit boards and things, but where'd you go to school?
Oh, that old question. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't. I dropped out of high school, in fact. And usually they just kind of cut
We're
the.
starting to see that shift now, which is nice. People want someone who can do the work, not necessarily has a piece of paper that has increasingly become useless.
Yeah, and I just ran myself completely broke. Kind of a funny side story with this electronics store. Since I had so many years of retail sales, and I really knew how to upsell people, like in the computer store, I'd just gotten really good at selling things. And so I was working this minimum wage job where most of the people there just didn't give a hoot about doing their job, but it was just like, it was in my DNA. I'd run around the store, I'd face all the shelves, make them look pretty. And, a customer would come in and they'd have like some electronics project and they'd bring it up and I'd be like, oh, what are you working on? Oh, do you have a 9-volt battery terminal for that? Maybe you should get one so you can like make it a complete, like, standalone thing. And they're like, oh, that's a great idea. And I'd upsell them all this. And so the manager loved me. Like I went straight to the top in sales. They had like this like competition who could sell the most. And I was just like crushing everyone. And so like, I'm taking all this time off to go to Silicon Valley. He's pressuring me, like doing the hard press, like you got to spend more time at the store. And I'm like,
Oh,
nope,
sure. Yeah, you're
nope.
benefiting him so much, of course.
It eventually got so contentious. And even though I really needed the money, I was just like, I quit. Like, I'm not going to be pressured into working a minimum wage job.
It's an unfortunate way to treat your best person.
Yeah, well, we worked it through. We're still buds. We see each other
cool.
every few years, but it's
Nice.
just, he was young, I was young, but so now I'm like running out of money and I can't take airplane rides down to Silicon Valley. I'm taking the Greyhound bus, which is like, it's one of these things you get on the bus at like 7:00 at night the day before, and you ride all night, stopping every podunk town between Portland and Silicon Valley. So I'm coming down to go to these different trade shows. I couldn't afford to get into them. So here's some of my questionable ethics, I guess. I just learned like how to like coattail into these things and just like march right into the trade shows and stuff as if I belonged there, or make fake badges and stuff to get in because I couldn't afford the hundreds of dollars to actually go. But I got a break. I met this one entrepreneur. We hit it off. He's like, you're just like the perfect, balance of go-getter that we're looking for. Come in and interview. So this is at a trade show. Come interview next week. And my heart sunk when he said that, because it was like, oh no, like I have to take a Greyhound bus back. And then a week later, come back on a Greyhound bus to do an interview where they're going to tell me no after 1 or 2 interviews. And so the situation was, it was exactly that. I started the interview, a couple interviews in, they cut me loose, and I'm walking out of the building, walking down the stairs, and I run into the founder of the company. He's like, hey, where are you going? And like, yeah, they cut me free. And they're like, what? Have you talked to so-and-so? And have you talked to so-and-so? I'm like, no, I only talked to like the first person or two. He's like, come with me. And so he took me upstairs and he gathered his whole team and he did a panel interview. And it was so fun. It was the first time I've ever done a panel interview. He's like firing off questions and I'm answering them. And he just pretty much unilaterally, like, we're doing this with you. And so I took it extremely seriously. Like, it was a pretty big challenge he had tasked me with. And so I worked day and night and did a really good job for him. And the design worked. I did a couple designs for him. And that was my stepping stone. And from that, it opened a bunch of doors. And I started to grow this reputation through the early 2000s as like the person you hire that can solve a tough problem, get it done, and assemble teams as well. So I started to attract a group of engineers that would go along with me. So we would just kind of parachute into a company, solve a tough problem.
Nice.
And move on.
That's a cool business model.
Yeah. And so I did contract work like that, mostly contract for like a decade and a half. And it was awesome. I did all kinds of things. I had a lot of opportunities that kind of put me on the map. Like one of them, it's so funny. People remember me because of this toy that I designed. And it's a pretty interesting story in itself. So this toy company found me online. I had been like posting a blog or something about some of my reverse engineering of retro computers. So I had a Commodore 64 when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and I kind of liked it. And it was like a good platform for me to sharpen my skills. So in my spare time, I would there's chips in it, that did different things like video and sound and keyboard interfaces. And I'd reverse engineer those and put those into this thing called an FPGA. It's like a reprogrammable chip. And I was just documenting that. And I was going to some like enthusiast groups around old retro computers and showing this stuff off. And this toy company contacted me and they're like, we've been trying to build an all-in-one joystick that has the Commodore 64 games that everyone loved in the 80s to sell for like $19. And we've been failing because there's no processor that can emulate the Commodore 64. And we see that you can do chips. So can you make a chip that does the entire Commodore 64? And I'd never done a chip before. Like, it's a big task to do a chip. I didn't even know how big of a task it was at the time. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. And so like, can you get it done in like 8 months or something? It was like less than a year. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. So nice. We assembled this little team. It was like 3 software folks. Some of them were already on the project when I joined, and I did the entire like chip design. So I emulated the whole computer, found a company that could make the chip for me. And then I had to eat a bunch of humble pie when I went to the chip company and said like, well, here's the real story about what's going on. I've got this thing kind of running in this emulator chip over here, but I know nothing about actually turning it into silicon. Like, can you help me do this? I'm in a really tough situation because now I burned like 6 months of my 8-month budget to design this, make the design. They were very generous. I found some mentors in there. They took me through the process. At this point, we're so late, and this was going to be a Christmas gift. So it's like July, and we need to be manufacturing. So there's this thing in the semiconductor industry called a hot lot or a super hot lot, where you just push a design through without testing it like fully. And so we had no choice. So we pushed hundreds of thousands of these chips through the foundry and made them and sent them to China to be assembled into these joysticks. And so I'm taking a bit of a break, resting after like such a long slog to design this thing. And I get this super angry phone call from this angry New Yorker. So the toy executives are these New Yorker guys, and they are swearing and yelling, and apparently the chip didn't work. And this is millions of dollars worth of chips that they'd produced, and put all this faith in me. And
no pressure.
No pressure at all. So I'm thinking to myself, am I going to have to run to Mexico so I don't get like knocked off by some mob boss or some
video
New
game
York?
people.
Yeah. I'm freaked out. They're yelling at me like, get your papers in line. You're getting on a plane as soon as you can, like 1 or 2 days, you're going to China. I've never been to China, and you're going to fix this problem. I'm like, oh my God, like, tell me what's going on. They're like, it's dead. That's all I knew is it's dead. So a couple days later, I get on a plane, go to China, get to the factory, which is a whole new experience for me. And they bring out this toy, and we take the screws out of the bottom, and I take a look at it. And the circuit board is not the circuit board I provided to them. They had decided to cost reduce it on their own. So they'd taken a bunch of the components
The
out.
manufacturer did that?
Yeah. It was too expensive.
Okay.
So they just replaced it with other things.
Wow. Okay.
And so, in electronics, the first thing you do for testing things, you put your finger on different parts of the circuit, and that introduces noise and capacitance. And I just that's the first thing I started doing, is like poking it with my finger, and all of a sudden it boots up, and I'm like, oh my God, they're not going to like chop me up and throw me in a well or something if I can't. So we made some changes. We got it working. Also, at the same time on this, I learned some valuable lessons about virality, right? I had no clue about viral marketing at the time, but this whole crew that we put together just loved this old 8-bit computer. And so we were adding extra things to the design. So the software guys were adding secret games. I was adding the ability for you to open the product up, hook keyboards and disk drives up to it so you could load your own games into it. And there were a couple questionable things, like we had pictures of us, the developers of the product, drinking beer with like famous programmers embedded.
Was it like an Easter egg?
Easter eggs and stuff like that.
Nice.
And the person I was dating at the time, so I was, same time as at the factory, we got it working. Some of the personnel were there, and I was kind of playing around with the joystick, and I dropped into this secret mode, and they saw it, and they're like, what is that? That's not a game that we put in there. And I was like, oh yeah, we added some extras. They were furious. Again, I'm now in the doghouse again, because we had potentially added things to this product that could prevent it from having like, I can't remember what the rating is for kids, but a kid's rating. So like, oops. And they're like, basically you're done with us. We're never doing anything with you again. You're a horrible person. Don't tell anyone about this. And so I'm like, oh, well, I burned that bridge. And so the person I was dating at the time, they're like, what do you want to do about this? Do you want this like Easter egg to never go known, or do you just want to just like tell people about it? And I was like, fuck it. Let's just tell people about it. And so he made a fake blog that was backdated and looked really legit. Like it was a factory worker that had been building the product, but he was kind of like a hardware tinkerer. So he had all kinds of hacky projects in previous blog posts. And then it ends with, my product that I designed. And he was really good at getting things on like Slashdot at the time, which was a pretty big site for news. And so 2 or 3 days before the product launched, and it was launching on QVC, which is a home shopping network. It's a ridiculous place to launch like a
back
product.
In the TV shopping days. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like all of their marketing, like they pay actors to go on there to market this thing, to talk about the features. And so like their marketing material was just making my skin crawl. It was like, had nothing to do about the Commodore 64 and the video games you love. It was more targeted to grandma and grandpa watching the home shopping network. And it was like things like, your grandkids will love this. Get 2 of them. You could have one at your home and let them take one home. And it's like, it has so many colors. And like, But anyway, we got this thing on Slashdot. It like goes straight to the top. people are like, holy cow, we've never seen a product that you could take apart. And it's like all of these people that love this old computer, like swarmed QVC day one. They sold out in like the first week. And then I get this call from the toy guys and they're like, what is going on? Like, well, I know you didn't want me to say anything about it, but it got out anyway, right? I don't know how it did, but it got out. And they're like, we sold out. Like, it's incredible. And QVC has been calling us up, wanting to know why 50% of the sales are going overseas. They don't even broadcast in some of these regions, and they didn't broadcast this product in those regions. And so that was pretty freaking amazing. And it put me kind of on the map as far as like making cool products, even though I'd made a bunch of products up to that point. And so I did
this is right? Slashdot was the news, but you're trying to sell through the TV. We hadn't gotten to the point of understanding social media marketing and pushing out e-commerce. So this is that hybrid time, right?
I mean, it's pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter, I'm pretty sure. Or if they were even around, they were so nascent that they were irrelevant at that point.
And that's a really cool indicator, being earlier on in the World Wide Web, let's say, where you were able to, as you said, go viral.
Yeah, and it was unexpected. And guess what? The toy guys loved me at that point.
Sure, you just made all their money back in plus.
Plus, they sold like close to 1 million of those, and they would have sold more if there wasn't some other. Wasn't part of anything I had dealings with, but there was some kind of dispute over licensing or something. But it would have just continued to sell like very like hotcakes. I went back and did five toys or so with those guys. I worked with a bunch of other toy companies. Pretty amazing. I made toys that have probably shipped upwards of like 10 million units. It's pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yeah. It's some of the toys I've done that have shipped in really high volumes are kind of, I won't say it. I don't want to slag on previous clients, but some of them were like things I didn't really agree with as far as like their educational value.
Nebulous benefits.
Yeah. I'm sorry, this is so long-winded. Like, are we doing good?
Yeah, we're doing good. This is the story. So you do the video game hardware, you make some additional stuff. What's next steps?
From that was an amazing springboard. I got to work on some really cool stuff. I worked on an IC that ended up in things like the TiVo set-top box, the video recorder.
What's an IC?
Amazing. Integrated circuit. So a chip.
Integrated circuit. Okay, a chip for the TiVo.
Yeah, it ended up in some of the models of TiVo, and it's like, but it was never as satisfying. That was never as satisfying as, say, the toys. Like I could go to the store and point and like, that empty spot is like that toy is selling out. And that's the thing that I made. That's amazing.
Right.
But a chip inside of some other device, like I didn't get the same kudos out of it, but I did a bunch of different things like that.
Is that how you came, or why you ended up going back to gaming now? Was it sort of that, is it fair to call it instant gratification of being able to see movement?
What's amazing about toys and what I can do in the gaming space is you can go from customer experience. And actually let me go back to the toys. This is this guy that yelled at me like viciously and like, you're never working with us again, also became one of my best mentors. I talk to him multiple times a year now. So in the toy industry, you get to pitch ideas. And if you pitch the ideas, sometimes you get a royalty on the design that you built. And it's kind of a lucrative thing to get a chance to pitch your product. And so I was very excited the first time I got to pitch to all the toy executives. So I made the Nerds Nerd toy. I won't even go into the features, but it had every bell and whistle. It was so high tech. It was amazing. I just glowed when I looked at it. So I go in, I do the pitch meeting, and they cut me off super early. I think there were swear words involved, talking about wasting their time. And they pulled me aside.
Is this one company or a bunch of executives at different companies?
One company.
One company. Okay.
I've worked at multiple toy companies, but it was this particular one that I kept gravitating back to. And I really wanted to have like a toy that I could get some back end royalties on. And so I was constantly wanting to be part of this. But it was a super valuable lesson for me. Like they pulled me aside afterwards and like, sorry, we were so harsh with you, but you know, whatever, we're stressed. But the reality is you need to have customer focus. You know, you are not the audience. Next year, when you come back and pitch, you know, before you even start the design, I want you to go get a box of Legos or Lincoln Logs or something. Like find a target audience you want to go after that's a kid that we're going to sell to. And sit cross-legged on the floor, play with Legos, just pretend that you're 12 again. Are you a girl? Are you a boy? Like figure out what the mindset is. You know, think about double buy-in. Like, all right, what's the key feature that you're going to put in this that's going to make them nag their parents to actually pay the money to buy it? Super valuable hearing these things. And so after that time working on toys, I've hungered for products where I can have a big impact on the end consumer. I can figure out who the end user is and I can target them and I can develop the product just to funnel right up to like that moment of delight with the end user.
So is it, do you do that through that sort of immersive experiential process where you're engaging with what that target audience would engage with? Is it market research? What is your form of market research to get in that headspace?
You know, I'm not perfect at it. No one is. I try to just do mental exercises myself because I don't put a lot of weight into market research. You know, those things are often crafted to like create a message that whoever's making the research, they want it to be heard. And so I try to create my own mental model and then I test it. And for instance, the current product I'm working on is AR glasses that you put on, you flip open a game board and this magical world springs out in front of you and you can directly interact with all these holograms with you and your friends, right? That's kind of the current product I'm working on. And so here's a story, just to fast forward a little bit, I'll come back. But I had this theory that holograms would play really well with a game called Warhammer. So Warhammer, I've never played it. I think it's interesting, but Warhammer is a bunch of people get together and they paint up a bunch of miniatures and figurines, and they make these mock battles on a big giant table, and it gets very elaborate, and they move the pieces around and they measure distances that arrows or bullets can be fired. And it's a very immersive storytelling. So my thought was, oh, this is going to be the perfect device for them. I could replace all those miniatures. We can have bullets flying. We can have smoke shooting out, castles burning. It'll just be amazing. And so that was my mental model. Then I decided to go to a couple events where they were actually playing this, and they're amazing. Like they're done in like school gymnasiums and big arenas and stuff where there's hundreds of tables set up with thousands and thousands of people doing these this role playing. So I go in there, I start talking to people and like, hey, I'm making this product. It could just replace all your miniatures and you'll never have to have them again. And you know, I just had this wrong mental model. They almost ran me out with pitchforks and torches.
Because they like that collectible.
Exactly. It's about the miniatures. So I left with my tail between my legs and I started thinking about, okay, well, I was really off base on that. So the next event I'm going to go with a different mental model of like how this is going to work. And so I went back and I'm like, hey, you know, I think I understand this. Tell me a bit about it. What if, you know, instead of that little piece of cotton that you've painted red that represents fire, what if that could really be just fire, like holographic fire sitting on top of your, you know, miniature or something? You know, what if you could track, you know, how much damage, like kind of like a little ring or something around your miniature that shows like the health of that particular character?
So adding the value of augmented reality to their tabletop game.
Yeah, replacing nothing, just maybe basically additive. And
Bringing it to life, yes.
They're like, that would be perfect. Like, having to measure how far like an arrow flies is like kind of sucks. Why don't we just draw a big circle that, and if anything falls within that circle, you can potentially hit your target? And they're like, oh, that'd be great. So that's kind of like the creative process. It's different for everything that you're going after, right? If you're going after a kid, you may have to talk to parents and try to figure out like, what interests their kids. And it's a little harder sometimes when you're further away from the target audience.
How is this process coming along right now? Where are you at with building out the product?
It's a never ending process, right? So working in the space of augmented reality, like this is going to fundamentally change the way that people interact with computers, interact with each other, how they play games. And so it's such a wide open space. It's never ending. You could name any industry, any kind of entertainment, any kind of anything, and there's probably some application that could be improved with augmented reality. And so it's going through these different mental models, like which ones have the biggest value to go after today. Let me back up. I'll finish. I'll try to move along faster. I know I'm burning up all your time, but I'll try to get through like how I got to augmented reality, because I think it's an interesting story and it kind of leads up to why I've got the bug and why I think it's so transformative. I started a YouTube channel just in the early 2000s because I felt that I needed to give back to mentors. And so I do all this hardcore science that you can do in your garage. It's kind of a fun project I do. I showed how you can make transistors and chips in your microchips in your garage in a very simplistic way. Or
people love that stuff.
Oh yeah. And I became quite popular on YouTube with that. And a company called Valve Software, they're a big video game company in Seattle. They also have
a little company.
Little company worth billions and billions of dollars. You're gonna love this story. So Valve Software has a content distribution platform called Steam. If you play games on PC, you probably buy your games through their content distribution platform at their store.
For sure.
Yeah, and so I'm working on a project for a chip company. It wasn't super thrilling, but it was kind of, I was in a good mental space with it at the time and pretty happy. And I collect pinball machines. So I have a ton of pinball machines. And one day I'm at a pinball conference and these people walk up to me and they're like, hey, you're Jeri, aren't you? And I'm like, yeah. Hey, we're from Valve Software. We want to talk to you about coming to work for us. And I'm like, well, I do hardware. I really don't do, software companies. And they're like, well, we want to get into hardware. And I'm like, that's red flag for me. Like companies that don't know hardware that want to get into it, it's like, stay away, right? Because hardware is a different beast.
Got it. So it's the challenge of bringing them up to speed. What's the friction there?
It's a different design process, and a lot of times companies that are software companies struggle with like the different lead times of doing things. Like software, you can have a really buggy piece of software, kick it out the door, and then just update it and fix it, on the consumer's computer or phone. Hardware, the stakes are much higher. Like you start 6 months or a year in advance to like ship this particular product. You got to get it right. Like there's no
day one patch.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things you can do, but you get a transistor wrong or something and you discover it after you've shipped 500,000 units. It's like nothing you can do.
Right. And problems.
Yeah. Expensive problems, millions of dollars. Software bug. Oh, it costs us $0 to just patch it. So, yeah, I was kind of turned off and they were trying to, convince me I should come talk to them, but I just disregarded them. And then, so I'm getting messages like on social media from them, like, hey, we want to talk to you. And I'm like, I don't think it's for me. I'm busy right now. Like, I'm polite. I'm not being super rude about it. It just didn't appeal the way they were presenting it to me. I was at Maker Faire. They showed up there, some different people like, hey, you're Jeri, you need to come work with us. And like, it's starting to get flattering at this point. So I'm like, And finally, I get this message from Gabe Newell, the founder of the company. He's like, I'm going to fly down and talk to you. And like, okay, I'll have lunch with you. So I was living in Portland at the time, and he flew down, went to have lunch with him. And, he didn't say it this way, but basically he's like, we're a big deal, right? We love you. We're big fans. Just give me like an afternoon. Can you fly up next week for an afternoon? It's not an interview. We just want to show you around. Biggest lie ever. I get there. They stick me in a conference room, and again, it was super delightful though. It was a panel interview. So it's a room of like 10 people. They knew they couldn't keep me there for very long. So they're like, if we wanted to make a joystick, how would you do it? And I'd be like, well, I'd go to this manufacturer. I'd probably like hire an industrial designer, and we'd have to do this testing. And yeah, we want to do this or that. And it was super fun. And partway through it, I'm sure Gabe Newell did some kind of, nose signal. Like it was very bizarre. Everyone just kind of got up and left. It was just like Gabe and one other person there. And he's like, come with me. And so he takes me down to the 4th floor of their building that they're in. And he's like, this whole floor is yours. You have unlimited budget, hire whoever you want. This is what I want you to do. Microsoft is constantly threatening to push our store off of Windows. We want to be done with them if that happens. I want you to design some kind of gaming system that brings the entire family together. I want grandma, grandpa, all the way down to the grandkids playing games together. Does that sound interesting? And I'm like, geez, wow, I don't know. And he's like, stay one more day and let's talk about it tomorrow after you sleep on it. And I'm like, I didn't bring any toiletries. I was just going to fly up for like a few hours. He's like, well, we'll get the folks up front, the front desk to help you out. So
Wow. Laying out the red carpet.
First thing they're like, hey, let's go to the swag room. And so they're handing me like Valve t-shirts and stuff like
some Valve toothpaste.
Yeah, so they're giving me t-shirts. And they're like, okay, we'll drive you out to the store so you can get toiletry and underwear or whatever you need to get. So they drove me around and they put me up, of course, in some luxurious like hotel. And I came back the next day, and of course, like they're turning it on really thick. And I was like, oh gosh, how can I not do this? And so I'm like, but I have this other contract. I got to finish it. It's probably 6 months. And they're like, oh, we got to get you. Like, can we just pay them money to like go away? I'm like, when I make a promise, I want to follow through. I'm like, I'll tell you what, I'll work double time, right? I'll work with you guys like 3 days a week, and then I'll double time it over the weekend with those guys, and we'll get this done. And that's what I did, and bootstrapped their hardware department. It was awesome. We brought in some of the best people. I had this thesis I came up with on how we should run the hardware lab. So we needed 3 types of people. We needed makers that could build things super fast. We needed researchers to go off and find the hard data about different gaming techniques we were going to do. And then we need product people, kind of like myself. And that's why I hired. I hired a lot of people like that, and super productive. We went off. We spent the first couple of years just researching everything gaming. There was no idea it was a bad idea. Spent gobs and gobs of money. We did things like we put probes on people's heads to read their emotions, and we fed that back into the game engine.
Love it.
We showed that you could improve gameplay. We read people's emotional state with cameras pointing at their eyes. We did VR, we did AR. And that's where I got the AR bug, because always in my mind, it's like, how can we bring an entire family together to play games? And AR is it. Slip on the glasses, magical world springs out in front of you. The interactions are so simple. Everyone knows how to poke something with a stick, or poke something with their finger, or swipe something. You don't need to understand a complicated joystick to have a delightful time in AR. And we prototyped that. And the AR experience in the hardware lab, people would come and hang out for hours at a time playing the dumbest games. Like we would have games that were like almost zero gameplay, but it was a social gathering time. People would come, and it was like, it was almost like the fidget spinner kind of phenomenon. People just wanted to sit together and fiddle with things in AR, like lead your character around, avoid the zombies. The zombies aren't very smart, so they're never going to catch you, but maybe you can Pied Piper them over to your buddy and get your buddies surrounded. with zombies, so he can't get out.
Compared
And
to Pong, going into that kind of immersive environment, I can
yeah,
imagine, especially if it's the first time for people, must be pretty wowing.
and it really stuck with me. I'm like, we are on to something if people are coming and just hanging out, and this is like the gathering place, for people. We win, right? And so Valve went through this kind of identity crisis. They're pretty hardcore game company. All their games are pretty hardcore. So we're also doing VR. And so the Groundswell was around VR because it kind of fit their DNA a little bit better, even though people tended to play the AR stuff more. And they thought AR was too cutesy, so they didn't want to do it. So they ended up cutting the whole AR team, and I ended up going out with it. I went to Gabe Newell, the founder of the company, and it's like, I can't believe you're killing. It was funny. It's like I went to talk to him. I was going to chew him out. Like I was mad. Like, you're killing my baby, right? And I walk in the door, and it was like, first it was anger for like a nanosecond, and then it was like me weeping for like 10 minutes, and then it was like the probably the smartest thing I ever said is like, you should just sell me this technology. And he's like, okay. So I went back to some of my colleagues at Valve, and a group of us got together and we formed a company, and
Which
we
is
bought the technology for $100.
Go Valve. Way to support a
Yeah,
startup. That's really cool.
Valve is a cool place. It has some pros and cons. Like, you can read about it. Like, they have a very strange company culture where there's no management. And so sometimes it becomes Lord of the Flies, and, whatever has the biggest groundswell will have an immune response against like other things. And that's what happened to us. There was an immune response because we weren't snapping in line and going with like the rest of the team. But they've always had like this mantra, like we're the good guys. Like, always, we're going to mess up, always try to do the right thing. And that's something I learned at Valve that sticks with me through my last couple startups, right? So yeah, we started a company, and it was very interesting. VR was taking off like mad. We did this AR thing. We raised a bunch of money. This is the first time I was a founder of a venture-backed company, which so many lessons learned. Money was easy to get. We didn't have to be like forged in a fire, like when you have to like really fight for something. So that's lesson one. Sometimes when things come to you too easy, it sets you on a course that's heading for tragedy. One of the other things I learned was I was too scared to be the CEO of the company. Like, I hadn't done a venture-backed company, so there's a lot of mechanics of it, like raising money from venture capitalists and pitching, press directly. Just so many things about it, and like, your ESOP plan that you have to put together for the employees. So I outsourced that. I hired a CEO and a CFO and marketing people, and I handed the keys to my dream to other people. And of course, if they can't absorb it, they just take you, off a cliff. And that's what happens. The company, and it ultimately crashed and burned. And it was really tragic. So I'm sitting in this office, and all of the celebrity CEOs that our investors brought in, constantly replacing CEOs to try to make the company work, had exited stage left, and they left me with all the baggage to figure out how to clean up the mess. Like, closing down a company is just as complicated as starting a company. So I'm sitting there crying in my beer. I get a call out of the blue from Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari. I maybe had met him once at a trade show, but he had been tracking our project and thought it was the best thing. And apparently he had been like watching my YouTube channel or something. He was a big fan. Somehow he found my phone number and he called me, and he's like, I just want to give you a pep talk. Like, I've crashed companies as much as anybody. Like, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. It's okay. I just want to leave you. And he also said, like, I could see this coming a mile away. You were outsourcing the vision of the company. You can't do that. And he's like, I just want to tell you, if you want this to happen, there's a way. I can't tell you how, just go figure it out. And that was the catalyst that I needed at that really low point in my life. So I started reaching out to my mentors and friends and folks that are savvy around business. Like, I just crashed and burned this $15 million company, and Nolan Bushnell was telling me that I outsourced all the vital parts and that I should do it myself. And folks were like, yeah, you know what? Those assets are sitting there. You can just buy those. I'm like, really? Even when I was kind of part of destroying the company? It's like, yeah. And so I went to all my trusted folks in the company. I'm like, we could do this. Like, it's a good product. You all know it's a good product. And my co-founders, they're like, yeah, you've always had the vision. Like, you should be the CEO. Like, we'll do it if you promise that you'll always be the CEO. We'll be there to support you. And so that's what we did. We bought the assets and we bootstrapped the company for 6 months. And we really put our heads together about what we were going to do right this time and not do wrong again. One of the things that we recognized that we had to do right is we had to go back to the old, who is your audience? What's the message? What's the elevator pitch to your audience that's so understandable that you don't have to teach them anything? And we spent a lot of time like, should it be medical imaging? Should it be education? Should it be games? And of course, we're kind of gamers at heart. So we kept gravitating back to that. And it's like, yeah. Like, we can free you from your computer screen or your television, bring you together. Like, multiplayer gaming is going to be effing amazing on our system. The thing that you have trouble doing on your computer screen, we make it so easy. So you can have that connection with your friends. And if your friends can't be in the same room with you, we can connect game boards together and have a shared holographic experience. And you're talking through voice chat right on the headset. You can see your hands holographically moving through this, magical world in front of you. It's like, oh, that's a great message. And we focused the company instead of what we were doing at my previous startup, where we were trying to boil the ocean, be everything for everyone. We're like, no, bringing games to the table, And it's been so great. It's great. Investors understand it. Customers understand it. Our third-party game developers get it. There's no confusion with the personnel. Like, they know what we're building.
Clarity is so helpful.
Yeah.
You just announced where you opened something up for people to build XR experiences on your platform. Is that?
Yeah. So the process, we bought a bunch of stuff from my previous startup. So we had a lot of the technology built. We needed to refine it because it had too much junk in it from not being focused. So we fixed the hardware up. And for the last, we did a Kickstarter campaign to kind of bootstrap the company and get excitement going. We were the biggest AR project ever on Kickstarter, which was awesome, partly
Nice.
because of that message. And we did it all with a marketing budget that was so small. We did it out of our pockets. It was amazing. And in the background, we attracted a bunch of third-party developers. So we've been working with them for about a year. So there's a bunch of content that's been in the works. And so we raised some money from venture capitalists. And now we're in production in the hardware. So we can build a lot of the hardware in China. So now we're kind of lifting the veil a little bit and being a little bit more vocal and letting people know that we're open for business, especially if you're a developer. And we want to get a lot of content. So there's this constant drumbeat. You get our headset. If you're not happy with the current lineup of games, there's always going to be something next week. And so the next 4 to 6 months is going to be just pushing really hard to get lots of different types of games. And so right now we have some really exciting platforms on our system. We have a platform which is a virtual D&D platform where you can do all these game scenarios, and it's got licensed D&D content. So our board, it's not so much holographic with their experience, but it's a giant monitor on your table where you have maps and you can put your miniatures down and run them across. We have another platform that has thousands of board games that you would know about. And so you can play multiplayer board games around the table or, virtually.
And this is with a pair of glasses?
Yeah. And it's cross-platform too. So if your buddies don't have A lot of our content's this. So if your buddies don't have glasses yet, you can still play on your PC or your phone and be part of the excitement
Very
until you
cool.
go out and get your own glasses. And then we have tons of other genres. We have puzzle games, we have action games, we have RTSs. We're trying to get a little bit of everything. So if you're a video game player, you're going to love it. If you're a D&D player, you're going to love it. If you're a board game player, you're going to love it. And so
So the headset is in what, early production for devs, and then what you're doing is connecting relationships with them to increase the amount of content. What is that about where you're at?
yeah, we're making this whole pipeline. Like we don't want like 100 games day one. That's not helpful. If like, I mean, it's helpful, but
You
it'd be
need to have
better
the
if it,
attention.
yeah, you want to kind of have that drum beat because we're
Yeah.
not selling a piece of plastic with a bunch of sensors and really awesome displays in it. Like I could go on and on about the technical aspects of our glasses. We crush everybody that's in the AR space as far as like tabletop experiences because we have this clever optical trick that I came up with. But what we're really selling is gaming experiences to people. And so we live and die by how many games we can get on the system. Like if I could, I tell people all the time, like if I could sprinkle magic fairy dust on the table and holograms pop out of it, that's what we're going to sell. Like we're not going to do glasses. Like I don't care about the glasses. I care about like the delighting the end user. And then of course, in the business, we have bigger aspirations. We truly believe in the next decade or so, this is going to become more and more prevalent. Like you can tell, like all the big players are working in this space. Like you've got Microsoft doing HoloLens, you've got Facebook doing some like audio AR glasses, and there's rumors Apple's doing some things.
Snap just dropped their developer
Yeah.
glasses. Mm-hmm.
But it's like we are like if we look at where we are today in evolution, we're kind of like at the Apple II, right?
Okay.
Kind of clunky. It can do a couple things really well. It could play some video games really well, but it's not like you can't pull an Apple II out of your pocket and use it like you can your smartphone. It took 2 decades to put a supercomputer in your pocket. And AR is the same thing. Like the Snap glasses are really cool, but they're a really tiny image and they only run for like 20 minutes. They're not immersive like our system and things like that, but they serve a different purpose. And there's like all these different avenues into this augmented reality space, like Snapchat. It's gonna be really cool. You'll be able to walk down the street and maybe like, tag a street sign with some words or something for your buddy to see, or record a video from it and live stream it and do
I
things
like the
like that.
word that you used earlier. Augmented reality, a good word for that is it's additive. It adds
Yeah.
to the physical experience that we're already having.
Yeah, that's again like that Warhammer experience I had. It's like sometimes when you have a hammer, you just try to hammer everything, and sometimes simple solutions are better. Like the Fantasy Grounds that does D&D campaigns. Like there's no need to have fancy 3D graphics. The players just want like a great map and story that they can use, and they just use our glasses to put the miniatures down. You have a beautiful map to play on instead of doing tiles and doing other things. Like you can get in and out of the game faster, or you could play with friends over the internet.
That's really cool.
You could
So
save your game, right? That's like, why don't we play more board games? Like, oh, it takes forever to set up and tear down, and my friends have to leave early and we didn't finish the game. Like one of the things that we solve is like, hey, I want to play Settlers of Catan. Hey, jump on your Tilt 5 headset and let's play. Oh, I got to go. Let's just hit save and come back to it tomorrow. So we're solving some real world problems in a couple of these gaming spaces. Or again, back like televisions, like my living room, I like to play multiplayer games. So I have 2 big TVs, 2 PlayStations, 2 Xboxes, 2 Switches. And that only lets me play with 2 people at a time. And it's a broken experience. Like if I'm playing a game where I need private information and I don't want my buddy to see me like, setting up my military men in my base, well, it doesn't work. But in our system, we can come around the table and have any number of people like playing some kind of strategy game, and it solves this problem of n number of users and privacy between each of the users. So it becomes up to the game developer to choose like what's shared between users and what's hidden from other users.
That's really cool. And so you're still calling developers in for the platform. Are
Yeah,
you
yeah.
are
If
you
you're
retailing to people who are early adopters in the augmented reality space?
Yeah, right now, our Kickstarter units go out very soon. So this summer, the Kickstarter units go out, you
Awesome.
know,
Looking forward to that announcement. That'll be fun.
and we've been pre-selling. So on our website, you can go and, get a pre-sale, and we've been doing tons and tons of pre-sales. So we have to catch up on that. Like we're just kind of getting our footing and like manufacturing these fast enough. So my goal is by winter time, like someone could go to our website, click buy, and then it could ship out like the next day,
Awesome.
if all goes well.
That's really cool. So
But I forgot about one of
oh,
the you brought
do
it
it.
up before we even uh, started the call or the podcast. So I had an opportunity. It's been a lifelong dream for me. So crashed and burned, and this is kind of relevant to um, what I got to do, crash and burning. Uh, Startup crashes and burns. I have some time on my hands. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do. We're spending like 6 months just trying to get things in line so we can go again. And so I need to get some money to help bootstrap the company. And a buddy of mine calls me up. He's like, I've got a small rocket company called Astra out of Alameda. And the person working on our flight computer has left and it doesn't work. You're the person that can solve this problem for us. And we're trying to make a low Earth orbit rocket. And kind of like the Valve guys, I'm like, I'm not really interested. I'm trying to bootstrap the company, but man, maybe the money would be helpful so I can like not go bankrupt again. And so I go up to Alameda and I walk in this old naval base building on this naval base. And here's this rocket, this giant rocket laying horizontally in this, building. I'm like, holy cow, this is cool. This is like things I've always dreamed about. So they schmooze me a bunch and I'm like, oh gosh, darn it. All right. As soon as my startup's going, I'm out of here, but I'll get you, on kind of steady ground. And so as well as bootstrapping the company, I built a navigation system and telemetry system for a low Earth orbit rocket, which was hard and frustrating at times, but we got it done. And it was so cool being like part of that whole thing, watching the first two rockets that went up and poof, blew up, of course, because rockets are really hard.
Yeah.
Unplanned, what do they call it? Unplanned dismantling or something. I have to say, it wasn't my flight computers that caused it to blow up. It was other like things like fuel leaks and things like that. But the third time's the charm. They made it up into orbit. And so I'm super proud that I got to work on something like that.
Yeah, you definitely have a rich history. And
I'll never do it again. Like that's one of those things that was kind of a dream job, but I can't imagine doing that forever because it's so much bureaucracy in hurdling tons of kerosene and liquid oxygen up into the air and not crashing down in the wrong place.
But it was a good season.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I hope they still bug me every once in a while. Hey, come back. I'm like, sorry. I mean, things are going so well at Tilt 5. There's no way you're going to get me back even to help out part-time, but I love them. I hope they take on the big boys.
So people connect with you on the Tilt 5 website or engage the brand, get a headset for developers. They can go sign up there as well.
Yeah. There's a developer program, and there's some money available for titles that we particularly want on the system. There's also a loaner program. If it doesn't quite fit into what we're looking for, like, that's okay. We can probably set you up with some loaner systems, or if it's really far out there, we can help in other ways. But like we have a lot of inbound that's non-gaming too, but we've made this commitment to stay really focused on gaming for the first release. And so we're supporting other vertical markets, but at a lesser degree.
Absolutely. Jeri, this was cool. I really appreciate you taking the time to walk through your story and like all the cool things. But I think it was also you overcoming the obstacles and in being open about the learning experiences that got you to where you're at today that is going to be really powerful for people.
One last funny story along those lines. So, I occasionally give this talk, and it's good that I've done some exciting things like rockets that kind of spice it up and make it more exciting for me to share, right? But at one point I decided, like, I'm really going to mix this up when I do the talk. I'm not going to talk about the highlights so much. I'm going to talk about like the times that I fell on my face, and not emphasize like I talked about overcoming, but sometimes when I tell the story, it sounds like I'm just like amazing and I just like did everything perfect along the way. And so I spent like a lot of time dwelling on like, well, this went really wrong and yada, yada, yada. And the promoter at the event came up to me afterwards. He was a little flustered. He's like, that's not what I expected. It's like, oh, sorry. So now I try to strike a balance between like the kind of harsh realities of like trying to like blaze your own path and be an entrepreneur and inventor and do things differently, and highlight the things that when it really works out, it works out really well.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been super fun. Thanks.
Yeah.
I hope my rambly stories
were great. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks.